Their tent had been cut open from the inside. They ran into the dark, without shoes, without coats, into minus 40 degrees. 9 experienced hikers. None survived, and the Soviet government closed the case in 3 weeks. Ural Mountains, Soviet Russia, February 1st, 1959. A mountain the indigenous Mansi people had called Kholat Syakhl for centuries. Dead Mountain. 10 hikers set out from Sverdlovsk on January 23rd, 1959. Led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute. All 10 were experienced mountaineers and skiers. Their goal was to reach Mount Otorten, 340 kilometers north of Sverdlovsk, one of the most difficult winter routes in the Soviet Union. 5 days into the journey, one hiker, Yuri Yudin, turned back with a knee injury. He said goodbye to his friends at the last inhabited settlement. He would be the only one of the 10 to return home alive. The remaining 9 continued, based on diaries and photographs found later at their campsite. Investigators were able to reconstruct their final days. Their spirits were high. They were experienced. They were disciplined. They were prepared. On February 1st, the group made camp on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl. Their last diary entries showed nothing unusual. They were cold, but they had faced cold before. That evening, they set up their tent on the slope, ate their evening meal, and prepared for sleep. They never woke up, or rather, something woke them. Something that made 9 experienced mountaineers cut their way out of their own tent with knives and run into minus 40-degree darkness without stopping to put on their shoes. The tent was found 26 days later, on February 26th, by a search party sent when the group failed to make contact. All their equipment was inside: their boots, their coats, their food, their skis, everything they needed to survive, left behind. The tent had been slashed open from the inside in multiple places, not torn by wind or snow. Cut, deliberately, by people desperate to get out as fast as possible. Something had terrified them so completely that staying inside the tent felt more dangerous than running into a blizzard in their socks. The search party followed the tracks leading away from the tent. They led downhill toward a line of cedar trees about 1.5 kilometers away. The first 2 bodies were found near a large cedar tree: Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonashenko, both dead of hypothermia, both partially undressed. There was a fire near them, but it had gone out, too small to sustain heat in those temperatures. Krivonashenko had 3rd-degree burns on his hands and lower legs, burns that medical examiners noted could not occur if he had already lost consciousness. He had been alive and burning and unable to feel it, or unwilling to move away. Between the cedar tree and the tent, 3 more bodies were found. Igor Dyatlov himself, 300 meters from the cedar, face up in the snow, hands clenched into fists in front of his chest. Zenaida Kolmogorova, found 630 meters from the cedar. Rustem Slobodin, found between them. All 3 were in positions that suggested they had been trying to walk back to the tent when they died. All 5 deaths were initially ruled as hypothermia, but there were details that would not fit. Slobodin had a small fracture in his skull. Doroshenko had injuries consistent with blunt trauma to his chest. Krivonashenko had burns that made no medical sense. And then, in May, when the snow began to melt, the remaining 4 bodies were found. They had been buried under 4 meters of snow, in a ravine 75 meters from the cedar tree. And what the investigators found changed everything. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had a massive skull fracture, the kind caused by extraordinary force. Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina had chest fractures so severe that the lead forensic investigator compared the force required to being hit by a speeding car. But there were no external wounds, no bruising on the skin, no cuts, no marks of any kind. Whatever crushed their chests had done so without leaving a trace. And Lyudmila Dubinina, 21 years old, a second-year economics student, was missing her tongue, both eyes, part of her lips, and her eyebrows. The Soviet government classified the investigation in May 1959, weeks after the last bodies were found, before any serious analysis could be completed. The official cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. The case was closed, the files were sealed, and the families of 9 young Soviet hikers were told nothing. But the details refused to stay buried. Some of the hikers' clothing tested positive for radiation. Not high levels, but radiation that should not have been there. 2 of the hikers had previously worked at nuclear facilities, which may explain it, or may not. On the night the hikers died, witnesses from another hiking group 50 kilometers away reported seeing strange glowing orange spheres floating in the sky over the northern Urals. The lead investigator in 1959, Lev Ivanov, admitted 30 years later in 1990 that he had been ordered to close the case and classify the findings. He said personally, he believed the glowing spheres had something to do with the deaths. The Soviet Union was conducting missile and rocket tests in the Ural region in 1959. Some researchers believe the hikers accidentally entered a restricted testing zone and were killed by the pressure wave of a fuel-air explosive, which would explain the internal injuries without external wounds, the radiation on the clothing, and why the Soviet government was so eager to close the case. In 2019, 60 years after the deaths, the Russian government reopened the investigation. In 2020, they announced their conclusion. A slab avalanche, a small piece of snow, dislodged by wind accumulation on the slope, had crushed the tent during the night. The hikers fled in panic. Some survived long enough to reach the cedar tree. Some tried to return. None made it. In 2021, 2 Swiss scientists published a peer-reviewed paper supporting the avalanche theory. Their computer models showed how a slab avalanche on that specific slope could cause exactly the chest injuries found on the 4 bodies in the ravine. Most scientists accepted this. Some did not. The missing tongue, the missing eyes, the radiation on the clothing, the orange spheres in the sky. The investigator ordered to close the case for those who lived through it. The families who waited decades for answers. A computer model is not enough. Yuri Yudin, the one who turned back, the one who lived, spent the rest of his life trying to understand what happened to his friends. He visited Dyatlov Pass multiple times. He died in 2013, still without an answer. The pass in the Ural Mountains was officially named Dyatlov Pass in honor of the group's leader. A memorial stone stands there today, 9 names carved into it. The mountain the Mansi people called Dead Mountain has kept its secret for 66 years. Whatever cut 9 experienced hikers out of their tent and into the darkness Whatever crushed their chests without leaving a mark. Whatever took Lyudmila Dubinina's tongue and eyes has never been officially identified. The files remain partially classified. The case remains officially unsolved. And Dead Mountain still stands, waiting. 9 experienced hikers, gone. Their tent was still there, everything inside. Their boots, their coats, their food. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Nobody knows why they left. Nobody knows what they saw. And Dead Mountain has never told anyone.